The topic from today is talking about experimenting. And I'm actually experimenting right now, talking to you on in a vertical frame, but also a little bit about exposure therapy. And before I do so, I really need to switch quickly to Instagram to go live. So I'm clicking it right now. And the goal is that being back, you can still hear me. Now, experimenting. Why do I say so? Because I've been talking to one of my clients, and she actually got trauma therapy, and they used a combination of a number of things, including EMDR and exposure therapy. Well, exposure therapy sounds exactly like what it is. You are exposed to everything that's going on. Unfortunately, and she's not the only one, it doesn't always work out that well. And in this case, I was flabbergasted when she told me that it was repeating trauma time and time and time and time again. Now, here's the thing, I do realize that when it comes to trauma therapy, they want to desensitize you. So basically, by reliving it over and over again, especially when you can look at it from a distance, say on a movie screen, so you can emotionally disconnect, that should work. But from the hypnotherapy that I've done, I also learned that it's about going to a safe place. So you go into the trauma, you give it a number, and then, yeah, okay, this is working. And then you go to a safe place where you're happy. So you go to your happy place. And like Chiki Joe is telling us, repeating trauma is the worst therapy I have ever had to endure. Well, so when we got to talk about it, and especially after having talked to my client about it, I was like, okay, so why doesn't this work? Is it because it's missing a safe space to go to a safe place? Or is it because this is not a one time, let's say 10-minute or 2 hour event, but we are talking about trauma which has been repeated day in, day in, day out for years on end. And in case of Cheeky Joe, we're talking about a suddenly shocking event. She lost her husband because of COVID, and it happens in a time frame of 2 weeks. And Cheeky Joe, please correct me if I'm wrong. And by the way, while you're at it, just let me know what this looks like on the several social media platforms. um, but getting back to, for her, it didn't stop with that one moment, the 10 minutes that she got to say goodbye to her husband. Of course, that moment itself was very traumatic. So she relived it time and time and time and time again. But this was about the change that she hadn't expected. She wasn't prepared to say goodbye. I mean, 2 weeks and then all of a sudden gone. No way to talk through it because he was admitted to the hospital. She couldn't see him. And then when she could see him, she could only say goodbye for 10 minutes. So, not while he was passing on, but prior to it. And he knew it, and she knew it. And the kids weren't allowed to say goodbye. So, a lot of people don't realize this, but COVID has been very, very traumatic on a lot of people. But here's the thing, when you suddenly lose your loved one and you are confronted with the emptiness, with learning new skills, if your husband has done all those things all the time, then how do you cope with it? That's the whole question. How do you cope with it? And if you are exposed to that one moment, those last 10 minutes, does that really help? And to link it to the other client, if you have been traumatized by, and let me put this, Joe's husband was a sweetheart, but you also knew what it was like to be terrorized by someone else, a prior partner. And unfortunately, I know a lot of people who have been traumatized by partners who would throw tantrums, or even worse, when you had to deal with parents, you would take out their frustration on their kids, whether it's because they had been imprisoned in the Japanese camps in World War II and then later on didn't know how to deal with life, or because of other reasons. And I don't know, is it correct to be exposed to a form of trauma therapy where there is no safe place to go to? That's something I want to explore tomorrow. But it's already something that I'm thinking about, and I think it's so important that people don't read from a book, and more importantly, that when you are, I'm thinking a very wrong word, but maybe it actually says it. So I use the word experiment, remember, at the beginning of this video. And well, when people come to you because they are traumatized, they are not experiments. They are not there just because you were like, okay, this is what the theory says, so let's go do it. But if you don't know what that trauma is like, and you haven't experienced loss or fear or having to survive every day, day in, day out, are you actually capable of doing it? That's basically a question that I absolutely have. So let's see what Cheeky Joe says. There should always be a safe place to get to and traumatize. Yeah, that's what I believe. So yes, I am a licensed therapist. Am I specialized in trauma therapy? No, I'm not. I've done some EMDR, so I know what the idea behind it is. I know a lot when it comes to hypnotherapy because, I've done my fair share of things. But most of it is, from what I know, is based on not only on what I've studied, but especially on what I've talked to and through with my clients and also friends, by the way. And, of course, I have also had my fair share of traumas. Let's face it. Fortunately for me, I didn't have to worry about any abusive partners, unless I did have to worry about abusive schoolmates. When I was still at elementary school, I almost got killed. They were trying to strangle me. So yeah, I can tell you that was something that was there, like day in, day out. You never knew what to expect. And that has shaped me into the person I am today. And one of the things I cannot stand is injustice. You can ask Cheeky Joe. She knows I can get livid when people look at women, for instance, and consider them second-rate citizens just because they're women. Doesn't make sense because we've got a brain too. And, in some ways, we are actually more flexible and more adept to actually getting into those situations and coping with certain situations, because from back in the days when the guy was away from home hunting for food, the women had to make sure that any intruders would be, that they kept their family and their kids safe from any intruders. So there's a lot of adaptability when it comes to women. But apart from that, it's, I do believe it. That's in that safe space. When I do meditations, I always take people to a safe place. And when I would do therapeutic sessions, that was prior to doing coaching sessions. So now it's sometimes it's sort of like a mix up because you can take the therapist out of the coach. And likewise, when I talk to people, you cannot really take the coach out of me. So it's not for me about going back to the traumatic event. When I coach people nowadays, what I do is actually work with them towards a new vision, a new goal, something they can work on. But what I do is use meditation. And during that meditation, I actually take them to the future. And I do relate to the inner child who may have experienced some things, but there's nothing like talking about that bond between the little kid inside of you who wanted to feel safe, and still wants to feel safe, but also the adult version, which can actually console the kid inside of you. And then on the other hand, the kid inside of you is still free most of the time of a lot of, what shall we say, we have been learned to do certain things, and we have unlearned certain things we really like to do. And as a result, we no longer are the persons that we could be if we hadn't been taught, like, can't do that. And let's face it, when we talk about trauma, there is a certain parallel in there, because the trauma taught you that certain things that you never thought were possible can happen. And well, unfortunately, a lot of trauma is also caused by people who are actually dominating and controlling you. Now, I'm not going to go into this for a long time. I just wanted to make that statement about, hey, I believe that when doing trauma therapy, it's important to have a safe place, a happy place to go to, a place where you can relax for a moment before you get back to that trauma, so that at some point because you feel safe, you can actually realize, like, okay, it might have been at some point in time, but right now it's no longer going on. So now I can safely step back and watch it. I know it has happened, and now it's time to say goodbye. And that's the cool thing about meditation and hypnotherapy, because you can talk to yourself about certain things. And I believe that one of the things when it comes to healing really has to do with talking about stuff, writing about what you have experienced, and just, letting everything flow in your mind. So I do say to people, go outside, go for a walk, get your drawing book with you, draw a little something, write statements, whether you use pencils or color pencils or markers, I don't care, just as long as you get it out of your system. So those were my 2 cents. I don't know if Cheeky Joe has something to add, or that she has fallen asleep. I know that apparently she's still watching, but like I said, this is an experiment. It's also about experimenting on how to do a vertical live. So I did it earlier, like a few days ago, directly on YouTube. And whereas YouTube Live says that it's possible to actually save it to your device, I couldn't. So I literally had to use Zoom, to use the screen share, turn off, of course, the microphone and the video, so it would literally show what the screen was sharing. But that takes a lot of time in order to actually do so. So I was like, okay, the idea of YouTube vertical, I love it. Um, it was nice to actually see that people were watching it, but I have no clue what it looks like on the other end. And that's why Cheeky Joe is here to actually support me and share with me what's going on. So I get an idea too. So she says, no, I'm still here. Just make sure everyone tunes in tomorrow night for a live. Okay, let me repeat that again. Just make sure you tune in tomorrow night for a live. So me and Cheeky Joe about the topics that I just talked about, which is about trauma and the happy place. And she's going to be live with me too. Okay, cool. Well, if you want to be there, it's going to be, I need to count quickly. It's 5 Pacific time, and that's at not 7 but 8 Eastern time. Yeah, that's correct. It's always a little bit confusing when summertime sets in. So in Europe, summertime sets in an hour later, a couple of weekends later, as opposed to the US, if they actually change to summertime, or actually it's standard time. So in Europe it's called summertime, but in the US it's standard time, if I say it correctly. Anyway, we'll see you tomorrow. If there's anything you want to share, please leave a comment so we can take that with us. And if you really, really, really want to be on the show as a guest, then you are welcome. But let me know in advance, because if I share the link, and Cheeky Joe probably remembers this too, we have had some really weird people trying to join, and then we get exposed to images we don't want to be exposed to sounds we don't want to be exposed to. And this is supposed to be a safe place where you can safely talk about traumas and how you learn to deal with it. And unfortunately, there's a lot of shortage when it comes to staff. So we have to make do with whoever's there. And yes, we sure did. So talk to you tomorrow. And don't forget, leave that comment.